Welcome back to ThinkTech. This is Global Connections. Today we're going to talk about the role of Belarus in the Ukraine war. And we're going to ask whether Lukashenko can be able to stay in power. With Valery Tsepkalo, he ran for president against Lukashenko, did not succeed, and he is a leader in the opposition movement, the democratic movement in Belarus. Welcome to the show, Valery. It's very nice to have you here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you for inviting me.
So going right to it, I guess the principal question is Alexander Lukashenko, able to stay in power in Belarus, or is it slipping away from him?
Well, it's a very hard question. I think now it's related definitely to the Kremlin, to Putin's regime, because Lukashenko used to have three pillars of his power. The first one was the connections with Russia, with Kremlin, first of all. The second is the dialogue, at least, that he had with the West. Just before the elections of 2020, even Mike Pompeo visited Minsk trying to somehow engage with Belarus. So he had this freedom of movement, but most important that he had was the illusion of the support from the side of Belarus people. And now two pillars, they disappeared because everyone now understands that Lukashenko doesn't have any popular support. None of any social groups, in fact, in Belarus supports him. And the West, in fact, doesn't want to talk to him. So the only way he can stay in power is the support from the side of Kremlin that played, in fact, the key role in 2020 by recognizing the forged election, recognizing Lukashenko as a winner, even despite the fact that he completely failed and lost the last elections.
Is it slipping away from him? I mean, is there a dynamic here where people recognize this, where the, what do you want to call it, the institutions and social structures of Belarus are finding out that Lukashenko is a fraud?
Yeah, well, it's now difficult to judge since he has Russian support, since he has the support from the side of Putin. And definitely his fate now is closely related to the fate of Putin, who will be having, in fact, also the election next year in March 2024. And it will not be that easy for him. He will not be easily reelected since he is losing the war in Ukraine. And I think it can affect seriously his chances to be reelected next year.
Are there free and fair elections in Belarus?
Oh, definitely not. Nobody, in fact, counted voices from 1996. The only free and fair elections we had in 1994, when, in fact, Lukashenko was elected as the president. But since that time, he never allowed free and fair elections. And normally he liked to play his favorite game by taking off the race the strongest candidates, like it happened in 2020. Three of his major contenders, including myself, were not allowed to run. He picked up an housewife, unemployed housewife, and that's what he also liked during his campaign. Previously, he also picked up women with no big social influence, not big desire, in fact, to participate in political life. It happened with Olga Abramova and Tatiana Kartech. I do not want to mention the name. This time it was Svetlana, but this time the scenario was not written by him. Just we decided to unite our forces, and my wife and Maria Kolesnikova, I spoke with them. They represented the two teams of the candidates that were not allowed to run, and thus this famous female trio appeared. But he just forged even these elections. And now I don't think that he will organize any elections in Belarus.
So can you talk about the control that Putin has over Lukashenko and the current effort, as I understand it, for Lukashenko to beef up Belarus's militarized Belarus?
Well, Belarus army, in fact, doesn't have a very big motivation. In fact, it doesn't have any motivation. And people sometimes ask why Lukashenko and how Lukashenko can keep Belarus forces from being involved into this conflict. I think the answer is pretty clear, because both of them, Putin and Lukashenko, are unsure about how Belarus army would behave. And most probably, Belarus army, when crossing the Belarus-Ukrainian border, most probable scenario would be that they would give up, lay down their weapons, then will be retrained by Ukrainian forces and enter as Belarus forces onto the territory of the country. And their main target will not be Ukrainians. Their main targets will be the Lukashenko regime. And, just even the fact that Belarus would surrender is very frightening for Putin, because it can demoralize even bigger than it is now the Russian armed forces. That, in fact, at least Russian armed forces has a motivation. Just their motivation is to get a part of the Ukrainian territory. But in terms of Belarus army, just what Belarus can achieve, what territories they can gain. We do have on the west, if we are talking about Ukrainian territory, on the west it's just a wetland and nothing. There is no big interest towards this territory from either side, because it's a wetland where you can only collect cranberries. And on the eastern side, it's much worse. It's just the effect of Chernobyl disaster. And what, even in theory, Belarus can gain is just only, just the territories that were contaminated by Chernobyl disaster. So even in theory, Belarus has nothing to get in Ukraine. And we didn't have definitely the propaganda, anti-Ukrainian propaganda that took place in Russia for the last 7 or 8 years.
What about that? There's a regiment of Belarusian troops who are in Ukraine fighting with the Ukrainian army. Now, that is a fantastic statement, isn't it?
Oh, yes, definitely. Because, just it's volunteers. And when you look at the army, they do have their own system of growing up. That in fact exists in any army of the world. But, just to create a system of command among volunteers, it's just a really big challenge. And we are really proud that young Belarusians, they go to fight against aggressions, and they are not the part of the institute of a state, institute of an independent state, but they fight for their ideals, they fight for the independence of Ukraine, and simultaneously they fight for the independence of Belarus.
Let's talk about your sensibilities for a minute. You were trained in Moscow. You've had, plenty of time to see what goes on in Eastern Europe, in the Soviet system. What's the story of your evolution from someone who is in the Soviet Union and now opposes something that Putin would like to do to recreate the Soviet Union?
Well, it's impossible to recreate the Soviet Union. Definitely, when we lived in the Soviet Union, we could not imagine that one day the Soviet Union would collapse. And in fact, I started my education in Minsk. Then I was conscripted and I served. I had my army service in Ukraine for 2 years. And then I started in Moscow. And in fact, I even worked with the Soviet embassy in Finland But when the Soviet Union collapsed, I made a decision to return back to my native Belarus, where I was born, and I felt that this is my country. And in fact, the majority of Belarusians, again, they didn't think about being an independent country, being an independent state. And that was true also in connection to many countries of the middle of the Central Asia, of the Russian Central Asia, the Soviet Central Asia and the Caucasus. But just when we got this independence, we understand that this is the value that we cannot trade. But you're right. We had good relations with Russia, and we believe that Russia could play a key role in democratic transformation in Belarus. And many of us really believed that Putin somehow could help us, and support the civil society of Belarus, but it appeared to be vice versa. He knew that Lukashenko had lost completely the elections, but despite this fact, he recognized him as a winner and gave him $1.5 billion and sending a clear message to Belarus law enforcement, army, and so on and so forth, that he would intervene if they would change the side. And that was a bad role that he played in 2020, but it was still okay, just if he had interest. But he definitely crossed the red line last year in February when he started a war with Ukraine. It's definitely unacceptable to attack the independent European nation, the nation that finally also got their independence, and they want to live with their brains. They want to live by themselves without any interference from the side of Russia. So this is, in fact, how my evolution, in fact, took place. The red line is crossed, and I think that no one can definitely support the mass killings that took place in Bucha and Irpin. No one can support the bombardment of civilian infrastructure, hospitals, residential buildings, schools, and so on and so forth. That's absolutely unacceptable.
So, what about some of the news now that is all over the web? There was a drone attack on a Russian AWACS plane. I guess it was near Minsk, because Russia has military facilities in Belarus by partisans, where they essentially destroyed this plane, this multi-million-dollar, I think $300 million plane, maybe less, but it was a very important radar plane, and it's gone now because of drones, presumably because of the partisans, the Belarusians partisans. What happened there, and what does it mean?
Well, it means that Belarus is Russia, and Russia also are vulnerable. And in case Ukraine would like to reach any target on the territory of Belarus and on the territory of Russia, they can definitely reach it, whether independently or having their supporters inside Belarus and inside Russia. So they do have levers how to influence situation and how to make damage to both aggressors, to Russia and to Belarus. And that's what Ukraine, in fact, demonstrated also before, and now with this attack on AWACS that you called it AWACS. But yes, this is the plane that helps to target the missiles to civilian infrastructure on the territory of Ukraine. I think Russia had only 5 of this type airplanes, and now they have only 4.
A good kind of plane to destroy. So now, we talk about crackdown. We talk about Lukashenko's crackdown. There was a Washington Post article last couple of days about a Nobel Prize winner who has been incarcerated now in Belarus by Lukashenko. And we hear news of thousands of people being arrested and incarcerated now as political prisoners in Belarus. What is the course of that? Is that getting worse? How does that affect the sensibilities of the individual citizen in Belarus?
Well, yeah, definitely. Now it's a big crackdown on the civil society in Belarus, and this started from 2020 only because people of Belarus wanted to have free and fair elections, and for that desire, they are severely punished. I don't know if you know these facts, but 45,000 people went through prisons, went through prison detentions, and this type and tortures, in fact, on the territory of Belarus after 2020 elections, which is a record number after the Second World War. During the Polish Solidarność in 80s, there were about 10,000 people that went through prisons. In Belarus, that is 4 times smaller than Poland. We have about 5 times more people that go through prisons, detentions, and so on and so forth. So this is basically the reality that we have now. We have only officially recognized 1.5 thousand political prisoners, but altogether they're about 5,000 because people are detained, let's say, for having white flag as a national symbol. They are not considered as political detainees, as political prisoners, but in fact they are. So we can say that there are about 5,000 people now are kept in Belarus prisons, and every day we hear new people are detained and interrogated and put into prisons.
And that includes torture.
Yes, well, I don't know if these tortures are taking place now, but thousands and thousands of facts were recorded about tortures. People went to hospitals, and good doctors, they put information that they just made special documents about the facts of beatings and tortures, and these doctors were fired later. Just this was true, and many of them moved then overseas to neighboring countries where they got the medical treatment, psychological also medical treatment, but physical treatment as well. So this was, yes, the reality that we had after forged 2020 elections.
So you have a population in Belarus of something approaching 10 million. A lot of people have left. They've left because of these events we're talking about, and they've gone to the neighboring countries. I mean, how does that play in terms of the remaining population? Why exactly are they leaving or not leaving?
Well, yeah, that's a very good question, because probably now there are not that many effects of tortures, as I say, but people in Belarus, they lost the sense of perspective. Since the regime doesn't have any agenda, it cannot have any agenda. It cannot say that, okay, fine, our country will be developing, we are moving, towards whatever objectives. The only agenda that this regime has only is how to stay in power. And people, they do not feel any perspectives in Belarus. And this is the reason about 500,000 people now emigrated after 2020 to the neighboring countries and to the countries of the European Union, some of them to the United States of America. Some of them, yes, they escaped the persecution, including, for instance, my family. Now, in fact, at this moment, starting March 1st, there are 12 criminal charges now against me in a criminal court of Belarus, just in a court of Belarus. Well, we cannot definitely call it a judicial system because we know in advance what decision the regime will take. But anyway, they continue to persecute even without our presence on the territory of Belarus, many political activists or opposition leaders. I do not like to call it opposition because we believe, and this is the reality, that we represent the majority of Belarus people. Opposition normally represents the minority if we look at the definition. But we know that if free and fair elections will take place in Belarus, we will definitely win. Lukashenko doesn't have any chances.
Talk about neighbors for a minute. Your neighbors are Poland, I suppose, and Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. A year ago, when Putin first invaded Ukraine, the notion was he just wanted the Donbass. He just wanted to restore, Russian control of what he felt was a Russian country. Now it appears that he's looking for other territory in other Eastern European countries that were formerly part of the Soviet Union. How do you know how the people in Poland, in Estonia, in Latvia, in Lithuania feel about the possibilities that they will be also attacked?
And this was quite a likely scenario because if Putin would succeed in Ukraine, then probably the next target will be Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, especially because Russia has an enclave in Kaliningrad region, and the only way is to reach this enclave is through the territory of Belarus, Lithuania, or via Baltic Sea, by sea. So these speculations, in fact, really were not only speculations. It was a very likely scenario that if Putin would be able to overtake Ukraine or even the part of the territory of Ukraine, he would move to Lithuania. And if the West would not react accordingly in the case of Ukraine, then he was absolutely convinced that no one would do anything in the West to protect Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia, even despite the fact that they are the members of NATO. But now, I don't think that we have to talk about this variance of development of situation, since Putin now has a complete failure in Ukraine. And I think that now he's only thinking how to make an exit with any face-saving formula.
Well, he's looking overseas, isn't he? He's looking to China. He's trying to get close to Xi Jinping and get support from Xi Jinping and look stronger than he really is in the eyes of the world. What do you think of that? What do the Belarusians think of that?
Well, we think about it the same way as we thought about Lukashenko, that, that Lukashenko in 2020, he would fail if it wouldn't be the support of Putin. So Russia was a geopolitical patron for Lukashenko regime, for Belarus, and therefore it played its negative role, I think, in the events of 2020. Putin is at the edge of elections in next year, in 2024, and it's very difficult if Xi Jinping can play the same role for Putin as Putin played for Lukashenko, because there are a lot of cultural differences between Russia and China. And as a matter of fact, the majority of Russians, they feel themselves more Europeans, more living in the European part of the continent rather than been closely associated with Asian nations. So he wants definitely have a support from Xi Jinping. However, I don't know if this is good for the future of Russia or not, because they have disputed territories with China, and after all, overpopulated China and underpopulated territories of Siberia, of Russian Siberia and Far East, can cause an appetite from the side of China. And whoever knows what the result could be of such cooperation. So Putin has to find the support from whoever he can get this support. But China definitely has its own interest. And I think that at this moment, just the whole world sees Russia not as a global player, but as a regional player. And now they are geopolitically on the same, has the same weight as Turkey, as Iran, but definitely not with China. They cannot be now allies. Russia can only be a subordinate to China.
One more thing, Valery, is that you're on the way back from a trip with Dmitry Bolkunets from Washington. You came to the United States to present at academic conferences. You came to the United States to talk to American officials. What was the purpose of the trip, and how well did it go? What kind of reception did you get?
Well, first of all, we wanted to convey the message how to deal with authoritarian regimes like Lukashenko regime in Minsk, that they do not understand the diplomatic language, and they consider the diplomacy as a sign of weakness. And we remember in 2020, when Lukashenko orchestrated the migration crisis on the border with Poland, brought a lot of people from Syria and from other Arab countries to the border with Poland, and Angela Merkel tried to make a phone call to Lukashenko. At that time, she was a chancellor of Germany. Tried to convince him not to pursue this agenda. He didn't even pick up a receiver because he thought that it would be just a diplomatic talk, and he considered his position much more stronger. But when Poland just shut down only one border crossing on the north, not the main one, with Belarus, the immigration crisis was over in only a couple of days. So Lukashenko sent all immigrants back to their home country. And why did it happen? Because, the only route from China to Europe by railway goes through the territory of Russia and Belarus. There are no other options. There are no other alternatives. And the trade turnover that goes between China and Europe through the territory of Belarus is about 5% of the whole Chinese-European trade turnover. So it's a big amount of goods circulating through the territory of Belarus. And if the border would be closed completely, it means a lot of damage for Chinese, first of all. Probably Lukashenko doesn't care about the European interests, but for Chinese interest, he has to care. And this is the reason he immediately stopped the immigration crisis, and everything came back, let's say, to normal. What is happening now is that Poland closed again the northern border crossing with Belarus, and also the same thing Lithuania did. And if it would be an ultimatum from the side of America and its Western European partners, to Lukashenko, asking or demanding him to release political prisoners, 5,000 people, to release political prisoners. Otherwise, the border crossing will be closed completely. Then he would go to prisons and release these people by himself, because neither Xi Jinping nor Putin would not tolerate it, since the trade turnover goes via the territory of Belarus. And Lukashenko and the political prisoners, they have no interest to Putin and to Xi Jinping. So this was the first message. And the second message is that we want to organize elections in Belarus to the National Council, real elections, using the modern technologies, using mobile phones, to elect freely, but definitely the people that they can be located all outside the territory of Belarus, but people inside Belarus will be able also to participate. And we asked the American government to support this idea, since they support a lot of elections and referendum, including modern technologies and traditional technologies all over the world. And even there is an institute or association of electoral systems, something like that, non-governmental organization that helps many countries to organize elections. And their knowledge and expertise can be valuable for that. So if we will be able to do that, we will create the only legitimate, in the eyes of Belarus people, institute that can be recognized by Belarusian people, and that can serve as a transitional institute when Lukashenko will disappear, or it can play a role in dismantling this regime in Belarus.
What kind of reception did you get in Washington?
Well, nobody, in fact, can oppose the idea of elections in the United States, especially when the US helped other countries to do it, like we gave the case of the Tibetan parliament in exile, or the referendum in Venezuela, and many other elections in Iraq. So there are many examples, and definitely nobody opposed it. But when it comes to money, it's appeared to be a different story. Frankly speaking, Putin signed checks with 1.5 billion much easier than the US government 1.5 million for the democracy in Belarus. But that's the reality, and we have to face it. Nobody, in fact, owes us anything. We can try now to find other sources of financing, because we cannot do it without money, probably from private sector, from private individuals or corporations in the United States.
So it strikes me, Valery, that a lot of Americans, a lot of people in Western Europe really didn't know who Belarus was before this started to heat up. But now it is heating up. Belarus is getting more attention. And indeed, Belarus is more important, in the whole conflagration in Eastern Europe. It's more important in the future of Eastern Europe. Do you agree with me about that?
Absolutely. The geopolitical role of Belarus should not be underestimated. And definitely we would like sooner or later to become a member of the European nations, of the European family of nations. And we would like to see our country as a parliamentary republic, which would choose its partners and allies based on shared common values. And strategically, yes, it's also very important, because we know that all the major wars on the territory of Europe, Belarus was involved. And it's just, it's a kind of a crossroads between Russia and Europe, and between Northern Europe and the South. Ukraine and Turkey. So yes, you're right. Belarus plays an important role. Unfortunately, now a bad role in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. In fact, in the war of Russia against Ukraine. But we will hope that in the nearest future, Belarus will play a stabilizing and much more important role on the European continent.
Valery Tsepkalo ran against Alexander Lukashenko for president of Belarus, unfortunately without success. But who knows what the future will be? He is a leader in the democratic movement in Belarus. Thank you so much for joining us, Valery.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.